Redfearn. This is where the Redfearn Grows Natural Farms here in Independence, Missouri. We're a diversified vegetable operation here. We're farming on about 3.5 acres of vegetable production. We use kind of a mixture of practices, some no-till, some reduced tillage, and some more traditional tillage practices. So we decided to start cover cropping to protect the soil. We want to keep microorganisms and things in the soil happy and fed, and also to prevent erosion and things, so, and to build organic matter. So we use a lot of, we bring in a lot of compost, we make a lot of compost, we spread compost in the soil, and organic matter has been increasing over time. We don't want to lose that momentum, especially in the winter time. For us, because we're a small acreage farm, we don't do a lot of summer cover cropping, but it's mostly in the late fall and the winter as we're just keeping the ground covered. So we do have overwinter crops as well. So there's some like onions and leeks and carrots and spinach in the ground all winter long. Those kind of work like cover crops, but then other beds or areas that are not gonna have crops in them as we do our final harvest in the fall, we'll be planting cover crops. So if you came out here in the winter time, it would all be green. It was all green with different stages of cover crops that just depending on when I could plant them. Right here we have some cover crops. So for us with the winter cover crop goal, the things we found best in our climate are cereal rye and an Austrian winter pea. They can both germinate at really cold temperatures because sometimes we're not seeding until late November, whenever we've finally gotten our last crops out of the ground, and I want to get something that can grow. And there's not a lot of things that can germinate at 30 degrees, 32 degrees soil temperatures, but they can. Now the peas sometimes at those temperatures won't. So sometimes if it's very late in the season, I might only plant the rye because it can still germinate at 32, whereas the peas need like 40 degrees soil temperatures. Other benefits of cover crops are the soil microbiology, keeping those alive. When you have bare soil is basically dead soil, so there's a lot. We need plants there to be delivering root exudates and stuff to feed the microbiology. So that's why we do that. That's one of the big reasons to do it, besides preventing erosion, building organic matter, weed prevention. I have seen a lot of improvements with weed prevention in the wintertime, just because like if you have bare soil in the winter, there are winter weeds that will come up, and then in the spring you've got this patch of weeds you got to deal with. So whereas if you've got a nice stand like this, I mean, there were no weeds on that bed there because they outcompeted them. And so this will be really easy to mow down and terminate it, and then it'll be a clean slate for the next crop. There are multiple ways to terminate cover crops, and rye can be terminated with like rolling and crimping. I've done that in the past. For us, it's a little bit of a challenge. You've got to time that perfectly with the exact right stage of growth that where bending it over will actually break it and kill it. If you miss it, and I've missed it before, they'll come right back, and then now you've got this huge cover crop weed mess. So they can be a challenge if you can't terminate it. Since we don't use herbicides and things, which is a 100% effective way to do it, but we don't use those on our farm. We really only have like the roller crimp method, or maybe mowing or tilling. You can mow them, and at this stage, mowing that should probably kill it. Those are almost viable seeds, and if you wait much longer, there'll be weed seed, or not, there'll be cover crop seeds in our beds, which we definitely don't want. So we got to monitor that as well. So what I'll do with this bed is I'll mow it, and these are kind of our no-till beds. So that spinach there is behaving like a cover crop. We seeded that in the fall. It's been there all winter. We got several harvests out of it in the fall and in the spring, and then now it's just kind of doing the same job as a cover crop, putting down roots, feeding the soil, covering the soil. And then I'll mow that and this cover crop here, and then I'll tarp it. I'll cover it with a black silage tarp to make sure I kill it, and allow that to break down in the soil before I go replant here.
Welcome to Millsap Farm, Springfield, Missouri. We're just 4 miles north of the city limits, so we're kind of a para-urban farm. I'm Curtis Millsap. My wife Sarah and I bought this farm 16 years ago. One of the keystones of soil health, on a small farm is cover crops, right? So what does that look like? And of course, you always got the old snide remark, well, every weed's a cover crop, right? But there's some truth to that, because underneath those weeds, what's happening is the soil's being fed. Those microbes, those worms, all that stuff is happening underneath that. But of course, weeds bring their own set of challenges, and so we don't really want to grow weeds intentionally. And so instead, we grow a lot of cover crops, mostly over the winter, and we mostly rely on rye and vetch. And we do that because it's simple, it's easy, and it's very reliable. So one of the challenges of an intensive farm like ours, most of our crops don't come out until November. All right, now our tomato crops will be a little earlier than that, but all those cool weather crops, all the brassicas, the carrots, the beets, all that sort of thing, we're really harvesting them right on through October, and then around the 1st of November is kind of when the fields start getting cleaned out. Well, rye and vetch are really the only things that we can seed at that point and have a good stand through the winter. And usually if we can get our cover crop in by the second week of November, we get a decent green cover. Now if we get them in earlier, that's even better. So for example, in the tomatoes, we'll go in and overseed. In September, we'll go in and spread rye seed underneath our tomato crop. And I say underneath, it just goes everywhere, but it ends up underneath it, right? And then when those tomatoes die around the 1st of October from a frost, then there's this beautiful green carpet of rye underneath. That's our field system of rye and vetch in the wintertime as we have space for it. We have messed with other things. We've done some peas, we've done some Austrian winter peas. I'm always trying to mix more things in. For better or worse, I just find that the rye and vetch are the ones that always perform. They always produce a stand. And so I tend to keep coming back to those in the wintertime. We do a lot of Sudan sorghum. And the reason we do that is because it's a really great weed suppressor. We get that understory is just totally shaded out, and so we have a big Bermuda problem here on the farm, and when we grow Sudan sorghum, it knocks the Bermuda back several years because it'll just shade it out. It gets no sunlight for a period of months, and that's enough usually to either kill it or at least drastically weaken it. And to some degree that works for bindweed as well. It's not as perfect for the bindweed, but it does help. And those are our two big perennial weed problems.
My name is Jason Hirtz, and I run Box Turtle Farm. We've been here since 2011, growing certified organic specialty greens. The crop rotation on this farm is fairly simple because we're really only growing lettuces and brassicas. But I am still rotating those because we have multiple spaces here, and they have different pests. So our main pests for the brassicas are going to be flea beetles for our baby greens. And I am just moving those around the farm. So a standard rotation is greens followed by lettuce, and then there's no more greens in that house, so it's flea beetle free. After that rotation of lettuce, I can go back in with baby greens again, and there's no flea beetles in there. And we've been cover cropping some of the houses. This year we'll cover crop about 2/3 of the space with something that's not related to either of those crops to help break soil-borne pathogen cycles. For our cover crops, the mixes that I'm using in here are going to be seeds that are larger and seeds that can germinate and grow in hot weather. So because of our grass clipping collection system, I'm going to mulch the house, throw the cover crop seed into that mulch and let it germinate through it. So I need a large seed that can handle that kind of seeding. And I found that really works because in a high tunnel in the summer, that mulch under the cover crop breaks down really fast. It's hot, wet, it's constantly humid under there, so that mulch is going to decompose really quickly. Typically in a high tunnel in the summer, a mix of buckwheat and sorghum-sudangrass is going to be what my standard mix. That's going to be about 21 inches tall in 21 days. And after that time, I could till it in any time after that time and expect that mulch to also be broken down. In our outdoor field, I do use some tillage radish. I don't use that inside the tunnel because it's a brassica, and it will help encourage more flea beetle populations and other brassica pests and diseases. So I keep that out of our indoor mix.
done some summer cover crops, and when I was opening new land out, especially in the front of our property, that was in pasture grass, really strong pasture grass, so I tilled it several times to try to kill all that off. And then I planted some summer cover crops. I did like 2 years of cover cropping actually out there to try to build organic matter and wipe out the weed seed bank. So, but that was, you know, alternating a summer cover crop till a winter cover crop, you know, spring cover crop. So what I found was, like, for the summer, for organic matter and really shading out the weeds, I really liked the sudex mix, like a sudangrass slash, it's called sudex, but it looks like corn and it grows like corn, and you can mow it, so like actually let it grow, and then mowed it with the brush hog at like 3 feet tall to build more root, you know, they actually extend their roots and stuff. Mowed it like 3 times all summer long and put a ton of organic matter down. And that was a great way to build the soil. And like I said, if we had more land, and I might do that, you know, take plots out of production and have like full on a year cover crop kind of deal, especially in the tillage areas. I wouldn't do that out here on these no-till plots, but because I don't really want to till them and bring weed seeds up if I don't have to. But out there, it was a good way to go for bringing in new stuff. But like now, all that land's in production. I don't really have time for summer cover crops. So, but there is living stuff in the soil all the time, and we're rotating our crops through. So I sort of picture, you know, as long as I've got living things growing, putting out roots in the soil, and I'm rotating crops through, if it's a cash crop or cover crop, it doesn't really matter to the soil. It's all good for the soil. So, you know, I really am growing the cover crops when I can't grow a cash crop.
We also use some clovers. Those we've mostly used like in living paths and among, like, for example, our kale plants. They're really early spring planted kale, so we're in there working the fields and the paths, so a rye crop doesn't work. And so ideally the way we would do that, and the way we've done in the past, is sprinkle or even use an earth way to put some clover seeds out there before we plant. And that way, as we are planting, we're kind of stomping those clover seeds in, and by the time you start watering with the kale, they pop up really nice, and then you end up with this low-growing clover mat in between the kale, and it doesn't seem to hurt the kale, or I'm not sure if it helps it or not, but it's definitely helping the soil overall. You know, I love it when a cover crop can serve 2 purposes, and so peas are a great example where we can actually, if we grow an overwintered Austrian or winter pea crop, we can cut those tendrils this time of year and use those in a salad mix or even as a separate item, and that's really a nice, you know, get your cake and eat it too sort of a situation. But more often with the rye and the vetch, it's really just a knockdown or till under cover crop, and more often we knock it down than till it under. We'd rather not do tillage on a cover crop. We'd rather just be able to lay it down and kill it that way. So we probably did cover crops from almost year 1 because we read Elliot Coleman, and you know, and Elliot right away says, if you want to be a good market farmer, build your soil, right? That's the foundation of the whole thing. And cover crops are such an obvious big piece of that. And at that time too, I'll say, we didn't have a source of really inexpensive large quantities of compost. And so cover cropping was just a keystone of how we were going to build soil. And even now, there's just no replacing growing plants on the soil. We have access to, we make our own hundreds of yards of compost a year. And so there's no shortage of organic matter in our soil anymore. Our numbers are, you know, closing in on 10% organic matter. But the difference between that organic matter coming out of a compost pile and that organic matter after growing under something, even if it's a weed crop, for a few months is drastically different. The texture of the soil, the water holding capacity, the tilth, all those things are drastically improved by growing something on that soil. And so we are absolutely convinced that the best thing you can do for soil is keep it covered with a growing crop as much of the time as possible.